Hi everyone, my name is John. Welcome back to my channel. The first book review I will bring to you in the year 2021, Happy New Year everyone, is a bit of a bittersweet one, and I'll mention why in a few minutes. This is the first book that I have ever read, I think, and reviewed by the great people over at Verso, and it is The Common Wind, Afro-American Currents in the Age of the Haitian Revolution by Julius S. Scott. And I just sort of read a few people had thought of the book online before I picked it up. I think I showed this in my Verso book haul and have already read it. Obviously, I'm reviewing it. And very much sort of lives up to its reputation. One of the unfortunate facts about being interested in nearly everything, and not everything, but I mean so many things that it would be pretentious to detail, is that the depth of your knowledge is really bound to remain inversely proportional to the range of your knowledge. In other words, the more you know, the less you tend to know about a particular narrow topic. And the geopolitical interplay between slave communities in the West Indies and the Old World makes for fascinating reading. It's a fascinating subject, but what I know about it could safely, before I read this book, fit in a thimble. Nevertheless, I was drawn to Julius S. Scott's The Common Wind after repeatedly reading that so many branches of historical scholarship which look at life in and around the West Indies in the decades leading up to the 1790s Haitian Revolution were affected by the scholarship in this book and its arguments, with one New York Times article actually describing Scott, and I quote, as a cult figure among scholars. And this kind of goes back to where I said that this was a bittersweet review. Unfortunately, that comment was made in Scott's obituary. He actually passed away early last month in December, on December 6th, 2021. Scott finished The Common Wind in 1986, though, and didn't have it published until just a few years ago. At one point in time, Oxford University approached Professor Scott, expressing interest in publishing the book, but the would-be editor made suggestions that he refused to give into. And Scott, being a bit of a perfectionist, it is his own work after all, politely declined the offer from Oxford. But eventually, in 2018, Verso offered to print the book as it stood, with no corrections, and Scott accepted. And one of the most influential, apparently, books on the social and cultural history of the West Indies in the late 18th century finally found a publishing home. So in the book, Scott's aim is to uncover the various threads that linked Spanish, British, and French colonies in the West Indies and South America through the period of the Haitian Revolution, say right up to the year 1800 or so. One of Scott's biggest successes is his ability to sort of flesh out the complex and interconnected and really highly cosmopolitan world that these islands were, both in their planter class, their what Scott calls masterless men, by which he means mostly non-whites who managed to maintain their freedom, and the enslaved. Cities like Kingston, Jamaica, and Cap Français, Haiti, and in Havana, Cuba. They, quote, nurtured the most complex forms of mobility and presented the most vexing problems of control for all the colonial powers, end quote. As Spain, Britain, and France made vast imperial gains, the social and cultural worlds of these cities grew accordingly, thereby becoming welcome shelters for runaway slaves and others who wished to change their station in life. These are the people who really drive the narrative of Scott's book, thereby making it a history of the sort of disenfranchised underbelly of the West Indies. Much of the writing done before Scott tells the history of the region through the lens of European intellectuals, Anglophone historians, while Scott actively contemplates the wit and the creativity and the inventiveness of these quote-unquote lower classes, these masterless men and escaped slave populations. Needless to say, the diplomatic treatises and official proclamations of the time don't really say anything about these people. So these aren't the documents that he's primarily interested in. In addition to using letters and books and journals and newspapers, Scott encourages fellow historians to carefully trace what might be perceived as sort of mundane interactions between marginalized people, like slaves and like women involved in commerce, as well as the steady inflow of news that was brought about by merchant seamen and transatlantic sailors. These underground figures brought views of the old world and news of the old world, as well as valuable knowledge to those who were seeking freedom, to smugglers and even poor disenfranchised whites themselves, trying to work their way around the ever-evolving set of security measures deployed by the local plantation class. Scott's work not only brings to the forefront a whole new class of people and their circumstances which can add to our knowledge of the West Indies during this time period, but he also carefully exhorts historians to rely not solely on records and correspondence, neither of which were produced in any large number for or by black people, but equally important, he says, are the orally transmitted accounts, like, quote, scraps of news, conflicting interpretations, elusive facts, and shifting rumors that coalesce together from all over the region. In urging his fellow historians to be more perceptive and creative purveyors of historical source material, I think Julius Scott expands upon the ways in which historiography is made possible by heretofore invisible historical subjects, and probably in that exhortation has shaped the last nearly 40 years of scholarship in and about the region. So a book that I wasn't really expecting to have been so influential, but it is kind of a bit of a cult classic in the area of Haitian Revolution studies and West Indian studies. So, if those are your thing, I would urge you to check this out. The Common Wind, Afro-American Currents in the Age of the Haitian Revolution, by the late Julius S. Scott. I will see everyone next week, hopefully. Bye.